Greetings, everyone. Here we are for another office hours video answering questions that were posted in the Facebook group. And this time I'd like to start with a meditation. And we could do together a simple form of Tonglen. That's a Tibetan word for a tantric Buddhist practice, which is quite beautiful and powerful. So first, I'd like to orient you to the elements of the practice a little bit. It involves inhaling the suffering of yourself and your community, and even, if you feel up to it, all humanity. And you feed that into a beautiful transformation station in the heart, which can be visualized as a sort of black hole, a beautiful black hole that has the power to devour all that suffering. And then you access your natural capacity for compassion. And this sort of compassion, it's relatively easy to access if you think of the example of a child who's very upset and crying for some non-trivial reason, let's say. Your heart naturally goes out to that child, right? And you feel the desire to assuage their suffering. So that's exactly the feeling that I invite you to generate, right? And if you think of that example, it's really not too difficult. And remembering that all these beings, including the ones who are confused and angry and upset, that at a deeper level, all these beings are really the same in the sense that they all are just trying to get their needs met in the best way they know how. And sometimes their strategies are not so skillful. Sometimes their strategies to get their needs met are even harmful to others. But they deserve compassion for that, not approval. Please remember, compassion is not approval. So these are the basic elements of the practice. And so let's just go into the meditation. So first, I'd like you to take some deeper breaths, some deeper, longer, slower breaths, some soothing breaths, if you like. And sending the energy of the breath to the heart region. And each inhale is with the attitude of nourishing and opening the heart. And each exhale is with the attitude of surrendering to what is in this moment. Please remember, even if you are working to bring about beneficial change in this world, one can never change the way things are in this exact moment. So when regarding this exact moment, the proper, as it were, spiritual attitude is to surrender. And that's not incompatible with work to bring about beneficial change. So again, inhaling into the heart region with an attitude that the prana you're taking in nourishes and opens the heart. And exhale from the heart region with the attitude of surrender, meaning non-resistance. And now letting the eyes close, please imagine or feel as if there's a black hole, a beautiful black hole in the region of the heart. And sometimes black holes are ringed by a kind of halo of luminosity. In fact, nearly all of the supermassive black holes have this beautiful halo of luminosity. So if you like, you can imagine or feel as if there is this black hole in the heart ringed by a kind of halo of luminosity. And acknowledge to yourself that this black hole has the power to devour anything and make it one with itself. And at the center of the black hole, there's a singularity point of absolute energy. So with full trust that this black hole can devour anything, please get in touch with your suffering, your struggle, your challenge, your sorrow, your grief, your anguish, or anything like that that's in your system. Whether it's old pain or new pain, doesn't matter. Before you get too self-focused, go ahead and widen out your awareness and get in touch intuitively with the suffering of your community. Sorrow, anguish, confusion also counts as suffering. Perhaps you widen out to your whole region or country. Perhaps you widen out to the whole world even. And with the next inhale, please inhale that suffering into that beautiful black hole in the heart region. Just pour it in there. Not because it's bad or wrong, but just because this is in our nature to transmute this suffering into compassion. So with the next inhale as well, inhaling all your own suffering and everyone's suffering as an act of love, pouring it into the beautiful black hole in the center of you. And one more breath like that, one more inhale, really taking in all that suffering, pouring it into the beautiful black hole. And now as you hold the breath just for a few moments, let the heart of compassion open, or loving presence you might call it. And then exhale that to all beings, including yourself. And if it helps, you could have a kind of phrase in mind like, may you realize your freedom. May we realize our freedom. May you be well. May we be well. May all beings be happy. Anything like that, if it helps. If not, it's not needed. So now with each breath, with each and every breath, please inhale suffering, sorrow, confusion. Pour it into the black hole. Let it merge with the singularity. And then exhale from the black hole and from the radiant halo around the black hole. Exhale compassion, loving presence, care to yourself and all beings. Always include yourself. So a few more rounds like this. Inhaling all suffering, including your own. Exhaling loving presence and care to yourself and all beings. And if you can, have a slight pause in between. A pause at the end of the inhale. And if you like, you can close the practice, finish the practice by joining me in singing Om to the hearts of all beings, including your own heart. One more exhale. And then an inhale of pure prana, life force energy. Again. Again. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Nice to share that practice with you. And now we'll come to questions. Just take a moment first to absorb the practice or integrate the practice. Just a few breaths, a moment of just being, as it were. Okay, we'll come to questions. This new, not so new now, but this new Facebook Live software doesn't really show me if anyone's here on the call. So it used to be able to do that. But we'll go ahead. I want to start with this question from Maureen. How does a Tantrika navigate the present times? How do we face this in a way that is different from classical yoga? And you know, a few people have written me to ask questions like this. You know, what does Tantra say about the times we're living in? Sometimes they're referring to the pandemic. Sometimes they're referring to civil unrest and protests and the problem of racism or police brutality. And it's really important, actually, to understand that the view of non-dual Tantra is the same in all times and places. There aren't sort of special provisions within the view for certain types of historical moments. So once you have deeply internalized the view, once you really understand, or rather grok the view, understand it sort of in your bones rather than in your brain, then you already know the answer to that sort of question. And there's no need to address kind of specific historical moments. And now that has become a fashion in the world of, the 21st century and social media. But traditionally, spiritual teachers in this tradition anyway, don't address specific historical moments in any different manner or provide different provisions. It's a matter of applying the teachings as best you can in the way that you understand them. Now, having said that, I do want to make a couple of just little comments that are not germane to any one specific political or social issue. First of all, Maureen asks, how do we face or respond to current events that's different from classical yoga? Well, that is an important question. And in classical yoga, wickedness or vice, apunya, or papa, that's a synonym, is to be, one is advised in the Yoga Sutra to be indifferent to what you perceive as wickedness or vice. And so that's not necessarily the tantric mode, because the tantric tradition in general calls for engagement rather than renunciation. So a classical yogi, as it were, is more likely to simply retreat to their cave and wish for the benefit of all beings, if that's even part of their lineage, which sometimes it's not. But a tantric yogi is more likely to engage. And what does that engagement look like? It looks like asking yourself, what would be a way of acting on my deepest values? And so you might, participate in a protest or something like that, but there's no advice that I could give, or that anyone should give who's teaching spirituality, about what you should do. It's if a teacher says, go do this, they're actually speaking beyond their scope. However, what we do want to encourage you to do is to contemplate your deepest values and to ask yourself, well, what would it look like to put these into action? That is very tantric, to really consider, how can I embody my deepest values? So I definitely recommend that. Now, in terms of a question another person asked, they sent in a message. They were asking, how can we accept what's going on, or how can we kind of just digest this level of intensity or conflict or division, or struggle or strife? And my best answer to that from the teachings is that you consider the five acts of God, that are taught in the tradition. Now, these five acts, as you know, are the five acts of you. They're what consciousness is doing every moment to moment, because you are God. Every one of us is. But I want to focus your attention on the fourth and fifth acts of the Panchakritya, or five divine acts. And the fourth and fifth are concealment, or forgetting, tirodhana, and revelation, or remembering, or even grace, anugraha. And I want you to consider that these are actually they're not binary opposites so much as they describe a continuum, a spectrum, as it were, where somebody could be all the way over on the concealment side, or they could be all the way over on the revelation side. What would that look like? Well, if somebody is as far over as you can be on the revelation end of this spectrum, that means they are absolutely communing with their essence nature, their innate divinity in full. And maybe it's only for that moment. Maybe it's not all the time. But still, if they're there, they would be communing with their essence nature. They would be their essence nature. They would be inhabiting and abiding in their essence nature fully, if only for that moment. And when one is in that condition, then the actions which spontaneously happen with no effort in that person's behavior tend to be for the benefit of all beings. They tend to be actions that express love, compassion, insight, connection, and awareness. And on the other hand, if somebody is as far over as you can be on the concealment end of the spectrum, then that person would have no access to their innate divinity, no access to their essence nature, even though they still are their essence nature, but they're not aware of it, right? They're not able to recognize it. They're not able to access it, one might say. And such a person, and again, they might be in that condition just for a moment or longer, and such a person will tend to perform actions that others find problematic or harmful or even horrific. Now, most of us are somewhere in between, right? There's people spread all through this spectrum and moving. We move around in the spectrum day to day and even moment to moment. And so this is the teaching that helps us understand how people behave as they do. Because in each moment, people are expressing their condition of consciousness. They're expressing their what seems true to them, So, for example, somebody is in the concealment mode, where they're not able to access their true nature. Then they tend to be suspicious of others as well. They tend to not trust any seeming goodness in others. If somebody's acting in a way that you might otherwise call good, then this person in concealment mode will suspect their motives, and they have an agenda, they're trying to manipulate me. And it's quite the opposite when you're in the anugraha mode, or closer to it anyway. Then you see the goodness in all beings, and that goodness might very much be covered up by conditioning and anger and hurt and frustration, but it's still there. It's still innately there. And Rupert Spira led a beautiful kind of meditation or contemplation recently, where he had people imagine the childhood of those who are now fighting with each other on both sides of the political spectrum, as it were, and imagine them as children and even imagine, a homicidal police officer as a child, to remind yourself that innate innocence and what we tend to call goodness is still there. It's still there, even if the person has no access to it. And of course, remember, as I said before, compassion does not mean approval. It doesn't mean anything like that. Those are totally separate things. So compassion doesn't need to mean enabling behavior that you find reprehensible or not expressive of our true nature. So, yeah, this is an important contemplation. Everyone is God. Everyone is an incarnation of God, but in the mode of concealment, in the mode of forgetting, in the mode of not having access to essence nature, people are likely, they don't necessarily do this, but they're likely to perform actions that are harmful. And why is that the case? Because it is great existential suffering to not be connected to your essence nature. Whether the person knows it or not doesn't matter. If they're not connected to essence nature, they're suffering, and it's the deepest kind of angst or anguish. It's existential suffering because they're not in touch with reality. They're not in touch with their own being. So of course, that tends to manifest as in expressions of otherizing or rage or hatred or things like that. Because when you are cut off, this just makes logical sense, I hope, as well as emotional sense. When you are cut off from your own innermost nature, that's a state of internal division. You are internally divided, and then it's very natural to see divisions everywhere, to see us and them are probably bad, and you see a world of division and conflict when you are divided and in conflict, right? Because as you know, that one of the central teachings of this tradition is macrocosm, microcosm, meaning each sentient being is a microcosm of the whole, and that works both ways. And when we're in touch with our essence nature, we see divinity everywhere. And that doesn't mean that we can't, see harmful behaviors as harmful, but it means that we see that divinity and beauty is everywhere, and suffering itself draws forth a virtuous response, and that is compassion. And that which is an expression, again, of divinity. Okay, so just have about another 30 minutes. I can't go as long today on this video because I have some other meetings and calls. And again, the Facebook software is failing, and I don't know if it's even working. I don't know if it's maybe somebody can write a comment. Well, maybe you are writing comments, but they just don't come through. So it's kind of amazing. If I can just complain for a moment, because Facebook is a multi-billion-dollar company, and the new software has been up for months, and it's still not working well. Maybe I'll try it in another browser like Brave. That could be a thing. Anyway, let's go to other questions. I'll now move more rapidly through some questions. Andy Wallace says, and that's actually my brother's name, by the way. It's a different spelling, but it's kind of cool. Andy Wallace says, if a situation calls for mantras to be used silently, is it as effective as vocalized? And are there any considerations when used this way? Oh, sorry for that loud noise. So is silent repetition as effective as vocalized? Yes, according to the tradition, it's even more effective, but this is assuming that you already have a relationship with the mantra in question, that you've sung it and you've recited it, and now you're taking it to a more subtle level of silent repetition. And so, yeah, it's totally effective. But it needs to, for in most cases, it needs to progress from out loud recitation to quieter and even silent recitation. But yeah, it can be more powerful. Um, then Mari asked this question, based on seeing a video from the Sanskrit channel. The Sanskrit channel in general is a great channel on YouTube, and you know, I wouldn't say that you should necessarily believe everything you hear on there, but in general, he's a great Sanskrit teacher, and his pronunciation is wonderful. But in one video, he says mispronouncing a mantra can cause harm over a long period of time. Now, some people certainly say this. I don't agree with this stance, this position, that mispronouncing a mantra can actually cause harm. What is it based in? Well, it's based in the notion that if you're invoking a deity, especially a wrathful deity, an intense deity, and you mispronounce their mantra, which includes their name usually, that the deity might become sort of angry with you with deleterious results. But the non-dual view doesn't really work that way, and I certainly don't hold that to be the case. Now, mispronunciation of a mantra might mean it can nullify its results, but I wouldn't say that it causes harm, and I haven't seen any evidence of that. Supposedly that is more true of tantric mantras that invoke tantric wrathful deities, and maybe some people have an experience of that, or an experience they interpret that way. But I haven't seen that. Yes, try to learn how to pronounce the mantra correctly, but also infuse it with love, awareness, and intention, and that does make a difference. And if you learn to fine-tune your pronunciation over time, then that's great, because that brings precision, and precision is a function of heightened or focused awareness. Okay. So yeah, somebody messaged in through another messaging app to say, oh yeah, we're on the video. I can't see any of you. I can't see your comments or anything, but glad to know you're out there. Okay, so let's move on. Avril says, what is your opinion on the cultural appropriation of yoga in the West? Well, this is a really complex topic, and it has to do also with shifting cultural values in cross-cultural mediation. And what I mean by that is that for many, 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 many decades, starting in 1893 and all the way up until recently, Indian teachers of yoga philosophy and meditation and related topics were actively proselytizing to the West, one might say. They were at least bringing their teachings here to the West, and inviting Westerners to take up these teachings and practices. And recently, in something like the last 15 years, the tides have changed a little bit. And this is due to a number of reasons, and it's a very complex issue, but a part of it has to do with the growth of Hindu nationalism and Hindu fundamentalism. And as a result, more and more Hindus are saying, no, don't take our cultural traditions. These are ours, and you don't have a right to them unless you sort of do it the right way. get properly trained and take proper initiations and stuff like that. And so there's no right or wrong here. It's just important to note that this is a major and significant change. And it's of course still the case that some teachers who are Indian, whether they live in India or elsewhere, are still bringing these teachings to Westerners and inviting them to practice within these traditions. So we have different voices. But part of the rise of Hindu nationalism is the claim that yoga is Hindu, and if you practice any form of yoga, you must acknowledge its Hindu-ness, its Hindutva, as it were, or you are a bad cultural appropriator, and you might even be called some worse names than that. This would be a less problematic stance if it was actually true that yoga is innately Hindu, but it's not, because it depends how you define yoga, actually. But if we define yoga as a body of teachings connected to a psychophysical practice that presumes a mind-body connection, that originated in India, 2.5 millennia ago or a bit more, then that is not Hindu any more than it is Buddhist or Jain. So because it's important to note that yoga developed centuries before there was even a notion of a religious identity labeled with the word Hindu, many centuries before. And before there was any notion of a religious identity labeled with the term Buddhist either. So none of these spiritual traditions had crystallized into religious identities at the time that yoga was born, and indeed for centuries afterwards as well. So now, another wrinkle, another problem here is that some modern Hindu nationalists or fundamentalists say that Buddhism is Hindu, that Buddhism is actually part of Hinduism, that Hinduism made Buddhism, and Buddhists don't have a right really to call themselves, to distinguish themselves from Hindus. Now, this is a position that all scholars of the tradition reject as meaningless, but it's almost as if some people are now using the word Hindu to mean Indian, and Buddhism is clearly Indian. But this is not how scholars ever use the term Hindu. So we have differences, when you have differences of definition, you're never really going to agree. So what would I say on this, on my personal opinion about cultural appropriation, is if you are publicly utilizing Indian spiritual practices or mantras, such as kirtan, or teachings, without sufficient training and understanding, then any Indian folks in your audience are going to feel kind of uncomfortable or profoundly uncomfortable when they hear these teachings being misrepresented or mantras being mispronounced. And so what I would invite is that you find out if that's the case, meaning to say if Indian folks feel uncomfortable about your presentation as a yoga teacher, then you probably need more training. You're probably not, maybe you're not even ready to teach. Now, we have a problem also that some of the most self-critical people have stopped teaching, even though they're quite knowledgeable, whereas some people who really shouldn't be teaching are enthusiastically doing so. So I don't invite you to be overly self-critical, but and this is a very nuanced issue also, because remember, if you're checking in with Indian folks to see if they're feeling discomforted by your presentation of the teachings or mantras, remember, some small percentage of them might be far-right Hindu fundamentalists, in which case they're definitely going to say that they're not happy with what they're hearing. And, that's an important caveat. It's more, it's, but most Indian people are not fundamentalists, and most of them are happy to hear Westerners espousing Indian spiritual teachings as long as they're not grossly misrepresented. So it's a very complex issue, and I just want to acknowledge again that those who consider themselves sort of woke, as the current terminology goes, are often likely to be too self-critical and feel they shouldn't be teaching even when they are quite knowledgeable. And then others have the opposite problem. So I don't know how to solve this, if there's any way, but it's an important sort of thing to think about. But please notice that some people, some Western educated younger Indian folks today are leveraging language that is completely new in this arena, that are accusing Westerners of colonizing yoga, and I'm not saying there's no truth or value to those arguments, but this is a new thing on the scene, and it's almost exclusively Western educated younger Indians who are using this language, whereas all the way up until recently, in general, we were met, Western practitioners, meaning, or practitioners of Western descent, like myself, were met with enthusiasm and joy on the part of South Asians who realized that we were earnestly and honestly doing our best to practice these teachings. Yeah, it's a challenging arena for sure. Okay. Let's see if I can get to a few more questions. What is the difference between ojas and prana? Prana. They are different. So prana is life force energy, and it's in you, it's in your body, it's in plants, it's in all living things. Prana is that which we share in common with all living things, even bacteria. And prana is also ambient. There's ambient life force energy on a planet like Earth anyway. And ojas is according to Ayurveda, is your vital essence. Ayurveda traditionally says there are 6 drops of ojas in the heart region, metaphorically or literally. I don't know how they meant it, but we can take it metaphorically. 6 drops of ojas in the heart region. When you lose them one by one through aging, but also through abusing your body, or addictions, things like that. And when you lose the last drop of ojas, then the body dies. So in this sense, I compare them to their like lives in a video game. You can die, however many times in the video game before you really die. But an Ayurvedic physician will say if you're depleting ojas, that's very dangerous, right? If you're down to your core energy and you're running on empty and you keep pushing yourself, then you are depleting your ojas, your core energy, which means shortening your lifespan, according to Ayurveda. So that's just a little bit about that. But prana, is life force energy, and it's linked to breath, and that's why we say when attention and breath, go to the same place, that really concentrates the prana there. So when we focus our awareness at the heart or at the belly or the base, the pelvic floor, with an inhale where we're directing the inhale to that place, even if the physical air can't reach there, doesn't matter. You feel the effect of the prana shakti going to that location and enlivening that center. That's another big topic, but I'll just say that much for now. Sean asks, how does one use or work with their linga stone? And he's referring to a bana-linga. That's a stone, ideally from a riverbed, that's in this sort of shape, and it's it's specifically called a bana-linga. This is the only kind of Shiva linga that does not need ritual installation. If you manage to, and you can easily get them in India, but you can also find them sometimes in sort of New Age bookstores or spiritual shops. But anyway, if you get hold of one, it's great because they don't need the ritual installation that other Shiva lingas do. And how do you work with it? Well, that's a whole topic we'll cover in the track called Deity Yoga and Puja in our new curriculum. But a traditional thing is you mount the linga, the bana-linga, the stone linga, on a tripod, and you then put it in a kind of dish or shallow bowl, and then you pour offerings like water, rose water or milk onto the linga, and you pour the milk onto the top of the linga, and it courses down the linga, and you focus meditatively on the point where the offering strikes the top of the linga, and that's considered the point of supreme non-duality, because you can't differentiate the offering and the locus of worship, the linga that you're offering to. And so you meditatively focus on that point. Anyway, there's more to it, but that's a little bit about what you do. And then you collect the offerings, right? And you might offer any number of fluids or sweet substances. So people offer honey and so on. It means more of a cleanup job afterwards. But then you collect the offerings, and that's now kind of like holy water, that's blessed, and you consume that and offer it to others, and it's blessed. And I forgot to mention, when you're pouring the offering, you do mantra as well. Jules says, what is the definition of consciousness or awareness in non-dual Shaiva Tantra? Well, that's quite difficult to talk about in words, but consciousness is, on the one hand, we could just say it is experience. It is the fact that experience is possible at all. So it's the precondition for all experience, and in a sense, it is all experience taken collectively. So consciousness is the fact that there's something it's like to be you. There's something it's like to be a human being. So consciousness is the precondition and the very substance of all experiences whatsoever. But we also traditionally draw the analogy of consciousness to space. Space is the context within which all physical phenomena exist. So space isn't a thing, right? You could say it's three-dimensionality, right? But space is not a thing, right? It's actually the context for things. It's the context that makes physical phenomena possible. So in the same exact way, consciousness is the context for all experiences. So consciousness hosts, or holds space for, if you will, all experience. And so consciousness is obviously, from this point of view, not something happening in your brain, which is actually just an abstract theory. It's a third-person perspective. The first-person perspective, meaning your direct experience, is that consciousness is all pervasive. It's everywhere because it hosts all phenomena, and therefore it's bigger than all the phenomena you perceive, one might say. Do you see what I mean? All phenomena are within consciousness by definition, or you wouldn't be experiencing them. So consciousness is vaster than the sky because it encompasses the sky. The sky is within consciousness. So this requires that you undo a conditioned third-person point of view that imagines that consciousness is sort of in the brain, as opposed to what's obviously the case in your direct experience, that consciousness is all pervasive and all phenomena have their being within consciousness. So that's the short explanation, and it's enough. I mean, because the more words you try to spend on that, the more people are likely to just kind of create a mental construct that is, ever more distant from the reality. Okay. Who's next? And by the way, if you're putting comments and questions in the chat window, I do not see any of them. Facebook fail. So I can't answer your live questions. Julianne says, when meditating, the energy is so strong between the brow point that I'm worried my mind is going to blow out of my head. So I open my eyes for a split second to steady myself, and the energy decreases. Should I just push on at the climax? It feels something like building towards an energy orgasm. I'm worried about having an energy surge and not coping with the consequences. That's a valid concern. You have to trust your own intuition about whether to push on to and through a potential kind of climax or explosion. Listen to your inner wisdom, listen to your intuition. But regardless, either way, I would suggest that when the energy gets intense here, that you relax the jaw, make sure the jaw is really relaxed, and imagine that the crown of your head dissolves, becomes porous, and that excess energy can escape like steam out of the crown of your head. Quite important. So jaw relaxed, crown of the head open, inviting excess energy to blow off like steam, and then keep going or don't. But yeah, just trust your intuition about that. What else does she say? Is there an upper limit to daily practice? Yes, especially when you're working with powerful energetic practices like tantric practices. In general, the general advice I give is, don't do more than 2 hours a day of focused practice. Now, some people can do a lot more, but that's a nice ballpark. And that could be split into several sessions. It's better if it's split into 2 or even 3 sessions rather than 1 session. And if you want to practice more than that, I recommend doing micro meditations throughout the day, right, rather than more sort of intensive seated practice. Okay, Wendy says, can you say something about John Woodroffe's work, aka Arthur Avalon? Is it classical Tantra or not? And if not, why not? Yeah, it is classical Tantra, largely, but not entirely. I'll read, Jason's response to that comment. As many of you know, Jason Schwartz is a scholar practitioner who's quite active in the group. He's working on his PhD dissertation as well. I sometimes poke him that he's too much on Facebook because we want him to finish his PhD because he's a brilliant young scholar and he already knows as much as could fill 3 PhD dissertations. So he should finish and start publishing for the benefit of all beings, which might involve being on Facebook less. But anyway, he also has a new second child, so that obviously is time consuming. Anyway, so Jason is again a great scholar, and he says Arthur Avalon is a composite author, meaning that the name Arthur Avalon actually refers to John Woodroffe, the British practitioner of Tantra in the early 20th century. It seems he was a practitioner, one of the first Westerners actually to practice authentic Tantra. But the name Arthur Avalon actually refers to composite work between Sir John Woodroffe and his Indian informants, as they used to call them. So Jason says, Woodroffe was an initiate into an early modern Vamachara Shakta tradition. So he had access to a guru, the access only an initiate can have, I mean. His writings, Jason says, offer us unprecedented access to what tantric knowledge looked like on the ground in the later colonial period, meaning early 20th century British-controlled Bengal. If you want to learn more about this important figure, right, because he was one of the first people publishing accurate information on Tantra in the English language 100 years ago. And Jason says that Kathleen Taylor has written a marvelous book about him called John Woodroffe, Tantra and Bengal, An Indian Soul in a European Body, ? So I haven't read that, but I'm sure it's great. But please note also that Woodroffe does have material that could be called classical Tantra mixed with some late Tantric material, post-classical, mixed with material that is more specific to the Bengal region, so Bengali form of Tantra. And the language is dated. But anyway, yeah, he was a real initiate, he was a real practitioner. Okay, so just the last few questions here. Melly says, I'm currently pondering how to balance the two seeming opposites in daily life. I think she means striving for aims while accepting what is. I feel I tend to accept when it means complacency, and I strive for an aim when it really means trying to be in control, refusing to accept what is. Perhaps I'm fooling myself both ways. So this topic is actually covered, I think, fairly thoroughly in a video I made called Invite and Surrender. And we can bump that up. I like that video. And it really is kind of suggesting this ongoing moment-to-moment practice of inviting and surrendering. And inviting means inviting yourself to some form of engagement, inviting others to some form of engagement, inviting life to move through you. And in each moment after the invitation, also surrendering to what is you issue the invitation. For example, you ask your loved ones for honest conversations or connection or whatever you're asking for. You ask for it, but then you surrender to whatever actually happens, and you trust that when you're issuing these honest invitations to yourself and others, however it pans out is right for that moment anyway. So there's a lot more detail and subtle nuance to the teaching in the video. So please check that out. David Gomez Correa asks about advice on being present with overwhelming emotions without getting stuck in them. I've already taught about this in the Foundations course and in the Facebook group as well. And if those teachings are insufficient, I would really invite you to look at whether you are attached to stories or narratives around your emotions, because if they're not moving through cleanly, or if you feel sort of crushed under the weight of your own emotions, it's almost always because you're believing some thought or story associated with the emotion or sparked by the emotion, or even causing the emotion. So to kind of determine whether that's the case, it can be, for some people, find it beneficial to do the work of Byron Katie. You can go to thework.com and learn how to do that for free. That can be one way of investigating that. Got to wrap up here because I have another call, but Volker says, is Siddha Yoga lineage, Siddha Yoga meditation, compatible with classical non-dual Shaiva Tantra vision? Yes. is the answer. What about the practices? Are they compatible? Yes. So Siddha Yoga is one of many modern Hindu sampradayas that quotes tantric philosophy and cites teachings from tantric masters like Abhinavagupta, but does not teach any tantric practice. Still, that doesn't indicate a lack of compatibility per se. But I would say that left-handed tantric practice is possibly not compatible with Siddha Yoga. And we're talking about the Siddha Yoga currently headed by Guru Mai Chidvilasananda, and she's made a bit of a comeback lately. She's been doing some live videos from her home in upstate New York. But anyway, you know, it's a slight bit of a problem because, you know, the Siddha Yoga lineage, and Guru Mai herself, they tend to cite authorities like Abhinavagupta who were left-handed practitioners, who did practice with transgressive substances, and did do sexual ritual and stuff, and yet they, as a lineage, they tend to be profoundly uncomfortable with that, or as an organization, I should say, they tend to be profoundly uncomfortable with that. That fact isn't even known to followers of Siddha Yoga, and so they seem to only approve sort of right-handed practices, even though they cite exclusively left-handed teachers. So, but anyway, I don't think that indicates any actual lack of compatibility, but the Siddha Yoga organization might say otherwise. Okay, so is that it? I think we covered almost everything. Great. So sorry I couldn't see your comments. I like to feel connected with you guys, but I'm sure they'll become visible as soon as the video's done. Nice to be with you, albeit invisibly, and look forward to the next time. Oh, please join for the Near Enemies webinar on Saturday at the same time, which is 8 p.m. London or Lisbon time. They're the same. And Near Enemies webinar on Saturday is on You Create Your Own Reality. So that's a very juicy topic to get into and unpack how that's true and not true. So I hope you join us. You got to sign up for the series, and then you get the Zoom link. Om. And for those who joined the video late, please note there's a Tonglen meditation, guided meditation at the beginning of the video, so please go back and catch that. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Much love. Om.